Hi, this is JoAnna Brandi, and welcome to Living on the Growing Edge. It's a crazy, changing, evolving, and expanding world. So staying ahead today means more than just keeping up. It means exploring the frontiers of thought, innovation, ideation. In this long-form video series, I bring you face-to-face with visionaries, disruptors, thinkers who are shaping tomorrow's workplaces and worlds by living out on the growing edge. They're reframing, reimagining, and re-envisioning. And as I learned from my first guest, reinventing. So I'm happy you're here. Enjoy the series. You can always leave comments below and be sure to subscribe while you're here. Hello, my name is JoAnna Brandi, and welcome to Inside the Growing Edge. Today, I'll be interviewing Jorie Houlihan, and Jorie has come into my life somewhat recently, and she's got a very, very interesting story. Our discussion today is going to be about the fabulous neurodiversity of ADHD. Jorie came into my life as an ADHD coach. So you're going to learn a little bit about me today, as well as Jorie. Let me read you her bio. Jorie is a disco-loving wife. I love that. No wonder you get up and dance a lot. Jorie is a disco-loving wife to Jerry and mom to a teen and a tween. She loves paddleboarding, doing ceramics, reading, the Cubs, and dancing. She has a wide variety of turns in her careers and her life. She's been everything from an actress, a secretary. Isn't that a requirement if you're an actress, right?
Yep.
Yeah, same thing as secretary, right? Network marketer, real estate agent, clinical massage therapist, and life coach. But at the age of 49, she was diagnosed with ADHD. While at first she felt relief, the thing that made her entire life made sense. And then she felt lost. She felt anger. She felt grief. She questioned everything about who she thought she was and the decisions that she'd made in her life. She also struggled to find a program or other support to help her work through it. So she created one. So she is a life coach for women who've been diagnosed late in life with ADHD. And now that that's actually a diagnosis, I'll bet you that more people will get diagnosed with it.
Yes. A lot of women are being diagnosed right now.
Yeah.
COVID kind of blew that open. A lot of women were in this I can fake it till I make it kind of thing. But then when you have all of your worlds converge into one space,
Oh,
you
it's
know,
happened.
yeah, there were a lot of women that were like they could kind of they were getting by. They weren't necessarily thriving, but they were getting by. And as was the case with me, all of a sudden I had both my kids home and I'm trying to, get them on their Zoom calls and helping with accelerated math. And I was a theater major, so that went well. And, and then my husband was also home and just trying to keep up with everything. And it was just so overwhelming. And I was really fortunate. I have a very good friend who I kind of jokingly said one day, I think I might have ADHD. And she said, actually, I think you do. And it turns out she had ADHD and she had also been diagnosed late. So she recognized the drowning. And so, but it was COVID. So I had to get assessed through more of an online sort of way, but it got the ball rolling and, here we are. So there's a lot of women that are getting assessed now and that makes me very happy.
Well, I think when you know what it is, you can work with it. I was
Yeah.
diagnosed 10 years ago, but I did nothing with it because when I looked into it, it seemed that the only thing I could do is put uh, things on my head and they would like work with my brain. And even I was told by a therapist that he wouldn't work with me unless I took drugs. Then I was told by another therapist that she didn't want to work with me unless I took drugs. And I had a real, I didn't want the drugs. I just didn't.
Mhm.
I do a lot in my life to be very holistic, and I'm allergic to a lot of things. So I couldn't even imagine what it would have been like. And so it was like, screw it, I'll just figure my way out of this, you know,
Mhm.
instead of continuing to study. And it was actually, in my case, it was actually, a woman I was working with for therapy for PTSD of all things. When one day she said to me, I think the problems that you're having have to do with the fact that you may have ADHD. I said, oh, yeah, I do. I had spent a lot of money on a course with, how we keep buying the courses that they're going to solve all the problems. And I was left alone. You had to go in several times a week and do this and do this and do this and do this. And I was lost. I was lost. So for
Yeah.
me, there's every your self-esteem is involved. Everything's involved in this. Every
ADHD impacts literally every single area of your life. And most people don't realize that. They think it's just, squirrel and losing things all the time. And while that is part of it, to a certain extent, those are kind of the least of my problems. And, out of sight, out of mind for me is by far my biggest problem. If
yeah,
I don't see it, it does not exist in my brain. And so it has impacted past businesses because I would forget about clients or prospective clients. I would forget friends, and and the weird part about it too is that we don't actually miss people, which is what's weird about it. And if somebody would bring up a friend that I hadn't seen in a while, I'd be like, oh gosh, I haven't talked to them forever. Then I would miss them, and then I would want to reach out, but then I
yeah,
would find myself hesitating because I'm like, God, it's been so long, I'm so embarrassed. I feel weird reaching out now, and you make it, you figure it out, and especially once you get that diagnosis and you start to learn all the different ways it's showing up for you. It's then I can use it to then kind of help educate people in my life, like, this is why I do these kind of things.
yeah.
And it helps them make better sense of my behavior too, because they're just like, if you forget about somebody, of course their feelings are going to be hurt, right? And it's just like, really, I just, so like, I have a list now where I put people that I want to reach out to on a regular basis, and I add it to my calendar and that kind of thing, so that does help with that. But people don't realize it impacts finances, it impacts health, it impacts relationships, everything, it impacts everything.
So interesting because most people think it's just for little boys. If they think
Yeah.
if you're not jumping around in your seat all the time, that you and I've had people say that to me. Well, you don't wiggle around, you don't jump around a lot. You no, there are probably some.
Yeah. Well, and that, I mean, I was diagnosed 30 years after the first time I brought it up with a doctor. And I
Yeah.
had brought it up when I was like 19, and I didn't know it was ADHD. I had heard of it. It seemed really familiar to me, like the symptoms, but at the same time, not. And again, they were always talking about how it was adolescent boys. And I'm like, well, that's not me. Right. So, but I was in for something else. And he said, well, is there anything else you want to talk about while you're here? And I'm like, well, yeah. And then I don't even remember what I said exactly. I just remember it felt like mush coming out of my mouth. Like, I felt dumb saying it. Well, I'm easily distracted. And I thought, my God, I am literally the epitome of the ditzy dumb blonde right now. And he basically was like, well, you're in college now. And, when I would bring it up, I was always told some variation of, you just have too much on your plate, or, that kind of thing. And I'm looking at my friends' plates and going, well, I don't even have as much as they do. Well, I don't understand what's happening here. Um, and so, yeah, so when I finally got the diagnosis, it was actually a little anticlimactic because I'm like, it's got to be this. If it's not this, I'm going to be really surprised. And it was. But then, like I said, I did go down the medication route, but not right away. I did what you did. I thought, now that I know what this is, I can totally handle this on my own. I don't need therapy. I don't need a coach. I don't need medication. I can totally handle this. And it was worse because now I know I have it, and now I'm trying to act like I've got it together
Oh wow.
because I've gotten the diagnosis. And meanwhile, again, I'm just drowning. And the same friend that said, yeah, I think you have ADHD, she reached out to me and was like, you haven't started meds yet, have you? I was like, is it that obvious? And she's like, um, and so I thought, all right, I might as well. I can't keep doing this. And for me, medication changed my life. It really was a huge game changer for me. But I also recognize that not everybody wants to do it. Not everybody can do it. I would never not work with somebody because they're not on medication, because they still have to learn the skills. And the
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
and the saying that pills don't teach skills is absolutely correct. Like, I was a little disappointed to find out the medication didn't, cure my
Oh,
ADHD.
pills don't teach skills. I like that.
Yes.
I
And
love.
so, but for some of us, like me, without the pills, I can't learn the skills because I can't retain the focus. I can't retain the information the same way. And, but it wasn't until I started medication that I actually got really angry, because I thought, oh my gosh, this is what everyone else has been working with naturally. And I
Oh,
realized I'd been living my life with my hands tied behind my back and not realizing it. So, I definitely went through an angry phase. And then one of the women that I'm in a mastermind with said, let me just play devil's advocate. And maybe you had to go through everything you've been through
yeah.
in
Yeah.
order to prepare you for the next step, whatever you're doing next. And I wasn't doing this yet, and I was like, yeah, I don't know. I'm still mad, It didn't matter at the time, but she was totally right because it absolutely prepared me for what I do now. And one of the reasons that my clients really enjoy working with me is because they know I get it. Like I've lived it. There's no shame when they work with me. It's a very open dialogue, and it's okay to mess up, and let's just we just have to see what works for you, because ADHD is, so while we all have similar symptoms, it manifests and shows up in different ways, and how we emotionally respond to it is very different.
Absolutely. I've learned a lot. I enjoy learning about it. Whereas before, I almost didn't want to know about it. It's like, I guess because it would make me responsible for it.
Yeah, yeah.
I find I am more open about it. And just doing this today, I am becoming more open about it because it does explain so much. It's not that I didn't want to get back to you, after that third phone call or whatever that is, managing the steady stream of what you have to do when you own a business. I don't know if this is easier for someone who owns a business or someone who works for someone else where there is more of a structure. I'm assuming I had it when I was in the business world. I don't know. I don't know how far back you go.
ADHD, you have it since you were a kid,
So,
usually.
and I'm trying to understand when I look back. Um, I can't. I lost the opportunity to be the lead in the high school play when I was a senior because my feet didn't work right. My singing was amazing, but you had to sing and dance at the same time. And when we went for the audition, they didn't tell you anything about dancing. And so they said, well,
Oh gosh.
you have to, there's no time to practice. It was all ad lib. And I just remember I was devastated because I had worked up to that without realizing that my feet would be what tripped me up literally. If I can't keep a pattern.
Yeah, well, that's very interesting. Um there are some people out there that say that people who are neurodivergent, they sometimes struggle with things like balance and coordination,
Mhm.
which I find to be really funny because I was actually a gymnast as a kid.
Wow.
And but being a gymnast as a kid, I think actually helped keep my symptoms more manageable because I was so active, that I my brain was just always engaged with things. And but then when I quit gymnastics in high school, and I'm in high school now, and so your executive functioning skills have to be higher, and
Yeah.
that's when I really started to struggle. And it definitely, you mentioned before, self-esteem. Like I was the only one of my friends who was not in the National Honor Society. It
Yeah.
was one of those things where it's like, I'm like, but I feel like I'm smart, but it's not showing up in the test, but now that I better understand it, I realize I just learn differently. I process information differently. And so, and not in schools right now are not really designed for that. They try to make some accommodations for students who are neurodivergent, but I mean, I can't imagine trying to accommodate thousands of kids in a high school. Like,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
yeah. But I do think that the more that we understand how our brain works, what causes things like, what I call ADHD paralysis, where like you just can't take action for whatever reason. And, when you start to understand better why that is, things like that, it just makes your life so much easier because now you can go, okay, now I see what's happening. Okay, I'm feeling resistance to doing this. What's going on here? And then I can ask myself questions, does this thing I have to do, does it feel too big? Does it feel too complicated? Do I think it's going to take too much time? Am I not sure what step I should take next? Because vagueness is like the death of any task. If I'm not sure exactly what I need to do, my brain's like, well, we're not doing that. So So
And that explains a lot of things in my life too. That's when I start scrolling the email because there's always something to do there. There's
yes,
always something, that's the squirrel thing, there's always something. Oh, somebody's having a new course, and
yes.
oh, and yeah, talk to us about what goes on. What is it that's happening in your brain when your brain is different in that way? I know you talk about dopamine deprived. I think you call yourself a guide for the
Your
dopamine
guide for the dopamine deprived.
your guide for the dopamine deprived. What goes on in the brain
Hmm.
when you have this? I'm going to call it a gift because I have been every time I take one of those personality tests and all that, I score off the charts in creativity.
Hmm. Yeah, we are very creative people,
Yeah,
even if it isn't artistically. Um, but yeah, so an ADHD brain, a big part of it for most of us is a lack of dopamine. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter, and it is the thing that gives you that sense of accomplishment, and it gives you motivation, right?
mm,
It's the thing that gets you to do the thing.
okay.
And so some people don't have enough of it. For some people, they have too many receptors, dopamine receptors. And so it actually sucks the dopamine in too quickly before it has a chance to mature for the next leg of its journey, which I'm going to go into in a second. And they've also had studies that have shown that sometimes the dopamine can't find the receptors, which I find hilarious because, like, what could be more ADHD than that? Even our dopamine gets distracted, right?
Find it. Where are you going?
So it's just like, where are we? Right. So for people who really struggle with task initiation or task follow through, that is usually a component of it. And then dopamine is then converted into norepinephrine and also known as noradrenaline, and that fires the frontal lobe. And in terms of ADHD, there's a couple things I'll talk about. The first one is the frontal lobe works as a filter. So we don't need to know 99% of the stimuli and all this information that we get all day long, right? That we don't even recognize because most of it goes into our subconscious because of the frontal lobe. Well, if you don't have enough dopamine, or if that dopamine didn't, mature enough, how well do you think that frontal lobe is firing? Probably not very well. So if it's functioning well, the 95% of the things we don't need goes into the subconscious. And so what does get through, the rest of the brain says, oh, that got through. That must be important. We need to pay attention to it. I'm
Mm,
clearly like giving a generalization here. But if it's not firing properly, way more information gets through, but the rest of the brain is still saying, oh, that got through. It must be important. We need to pay attention to it. And so that is why we have, shiny object syndrome, and why we're so easily distracted, and why, when I was in school and I had to take tests, I could not hear the clock ticking. And it was such a distraction. And so, and it was, I'm like, oh, that now I understand why that was. And then the other part of the frontal lobe is that's where a lot of executive functioning is held. So
of course, yeah.
planning, prioritizing, organizing, time management, all of that is impacted by ADHD. And so those are the main components. Most people with ADHD do have a lot of executive dysfunction. It may not show up the same way for everybody, but it does impact it. And yeah, so those are the two main things that I would say in terms of how it impacts an ADHD brain. Um, and the creativity that you spoke of, we're very much out of the box thinkers. I kind of joke that my brain doesn't know there is a box. So, but we are, I personally believe everybody with ADHD is a creative problem solver because we've had to learn how to adapt and cope in a neurotypical society, right? There, we have to do sometimes weird, what other people would consider to be weird things so that we don't lose our keys 50 times a day, right? It takes us a long time to learn lessons because we have poor working memory. So we don't remember how painful it was the last time we couldn't find our keys and we're running late.
Solve the key problem. I a hook.
Yes, I do now too, but I did many times in the past, and I would just not. I just would
I
suddenly
know.
stop doing it, and now I finally, I'm much better about it.
I found, and I didn't go looking to study it. I really didn't. Like I said, I thought I could work around it. But I found I started reading Dr. Daniel Amen, the brain
Hmm.
guy. And I started reading it, and what I started noticing is habits my mother had. My mother could never find her keys, ever.
Mhm.
And there was one night she used to come and visit here in Florida, and we go out to dinner at night or whatever. One day I got there and the keys couldn't be found anywhere. I mean, couldn't be found anywhere. Looked absolutely everywhere for the keys. And she said they must have gone, when I threw the garbage out, they must have gone down the chute to the dumpster.
Oh.
It's a rental car.
Oh gosh. Oh
I
no.
actually had to go and get a ladder, and because she was frantic, and then she began believing that they had to be in the dumpster. They couldn't be anywhere else. We found them in one of her drawers for some reason. Now, that was as she got older. And I think even with myself, as I get older, it becomes a little bit more difficult. I don't think I had as much difficulty when I was younger, but I
Mhm.
also in the first part of my career working in an organization, I had a lot of people working for me and with me. So
Yes, and that is very helpful when you can delegate
yeah.
things that are not your strong suits out. That is one of the best things that we can do with ADHD. The other thing is that hormones impact the severity of our symptoms. So the
Oh,
lower the so dopamine and estrogen levels are connected. So for women who still have a cycle, they may find that the week right before their period, they are if they're on medication, for example, they're probably going, "Did I take my medication today?" Because your symptoms seem like so much worse. And then when you're going into menopause, your estrogen levels, go down a lot. If they go down almost entirely. So, and so that's why the other reason I think that a lot of women are getting assessed now is because my generation, Gen X, we were completely missed for the most part with this. And so when they started to see all these other people getting diagnosed, they started to go, oh, well, this makes sense. And that's why the one of the questions that's important is, well, did you have this when you were younger? Because if it's something that's like more of a newish thing, that may just be menopause. And that, which is a separate thing because that brain fog and a lot of that stuff comes with menopause.
yes,
But
yeah.
it's so much worse when you have ADHD. And, we have emotional dysregulation anyway. Now you have, when women are losing their estrogen, we're sometimes a little prickly. And so it's even worse when you have ADHD. So there's a lot of there's a lot of components to it that do impact severity of symptoms. When you go into menopause, your sleep goes in the toilet. That's what I've been dealing with lately.
Yeah, yeah.
Lack of sleep impacts the severity of symptoms. So it's pretty rough there for a while until you get everything leveled out the way you need to, or get the medications or the systems or whatever in place. But that definitely helps. And I have found that a lot of women who have ADHD, when they think about their childhood, they don't have very strong memories from their childhood.
That's
Like,
interesting.
yeah, I don't. I have memories, but they're not vivid. They're not like some people can remember such finite details in their memories, and I'm like, I know I was alive at that time, and I think I was still living with my parents. Like, it's one of those things where
Mhm.
I just don't have that. And so it's always so weird to me when people be like, "Oh, do you remember that one time?" And they list out all these, and I'm like, I have no memory of this at all. And so it's a very interesting condition to have.
Well, I'm glad you're able to look at it as interesting.
Well, like you, I mean, I tend to stay away from words like superpower and things like that because for some people, not just women, ADHD is very debilitating. And it is considered a disability under the ADA, actually.
It.
So it is. And so you can ask for accommodations at work, at school, all of that.
Oh,
And because a lot of people say, well, I forget things too. Every once in a while.
yeah, of
But it's
course.
that every once in a while that
Mhm.
sets it apart. I'm like, yeah, I have that happen every single day, multiple times a day. That's what makes it disabling. When you are constantly like looking for things, when you're constantly forgetting things, when you're constantly like trying to keep yourself emotionally in check, like there's just so many elements to where you go, yeah, this is like all over my life. And I didn't know how much until even after I was diagnosed. I was like, oh, that explains why my money's always been a little weird because I struggled to save money. I always struggled with that
Uh,
in that department. And a lot of women with ADHD struggle with money. And because there's impulse shopping, and there's because we have time blindness. Time blindness covers three different things. We don't we don't feel time passing the same way other people do, if at
yeah,
all.
yeah, yeah. I just really learned about that because you and I are in a very new relationship yet, but I just really learned about time blindness, and it makes a lot of sense. I go, oh, is that what happened? Because I had a lifelong childhood friend that she would remember, I mean, every single thing. And I would go, huh? Same thing. Not quite. I don't think I had it or it didn't show up until I was a little later in life.
Yeah, I think, well, for some people, because a lot of us learn to just cope really well.
And that's it too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we cope well, and especially for girls and women, we're taught to mask basically from
Yep.
like conception, anything that isn't socially acceptable, right? So
Right,
we
right.
are really good at hiding our symptoms.
Yeah.
And and I actually just did a reel about this because I've been asked, well, if yours was so severe, well, how come it took you so long to get diagnosed? And and I was like, okay, so imagine that you have bad vision, only you don't know you have bad vision.
Right.
You think that everybody sees the world the same way you do, and because you have learned to cope well enough, things that should have been red flags are dismissed as something else. So, for example, you're tripping over things all the time because you don't see it well,
Right.
right? But instead of somebody saying, "Oh, you should get your vision checked," they're like, "Oh, you're so clumsy. You really need to watch where you're going." And eventually, that's what you tell yourself. "Oh, I'm
Right.
so clumsy."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just thought, I'm lazy. I must not be very smart. Blah blah, the whole works. And it really
Wow.
comes down to, how does somebody who has bad vision know they have bad vision if they've never seen clearly, right?
Mm.
And so I've only had this brain, and I thought that everybody did a lot of the things I did. They just did it better in terms of
Wow. Yeah.
coping and adulting, and especially after, I talked to many doctors over the years, just, I remember being on the L and thinking, I should talk to my doctor about this when I get there. First, I was going for something else. And I'm sure I forgot about it before I even got to the next L stop. Like, it was out of my head that fast.
Yeah.
So, but but in terms of where I feel that we have a lot of strengths, I do, like I said before, I think we are really good creative problem solvers. I
Mm,
tell
yeah.
people all the time, if you've been trying to solve a problem and you've been using logic, bring it to me, because I just look at it, I just look at it differently.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's
Yeah,
great.
and we're very persistent. Like, you and I have talked about, like, how often people with ADHD take personal development courses,
Ah,
and we're doing it unknowingly until we're diagnosed, trying to fix aspects of our ADHD that can't actually be
yeah.
fixed. But we're always like trying. We're always, I joke about planners because, planners are kind of a running joke because we get one and we'll use it for like 2 days and then we never look at it again.
But yes, and then you see a new planner or decide to use pink paper to make a list instead of the white paper. It's I
And
find
we're
it
sure it's going to be.
amusing, very amusing.
Yes. Well, I finally did find a paper planner I like, but every time we get one, we're like, this is the one that's going to get me organized.
I
We're
know.
very optimistic, you know, a little delusional sometimes, but we're optimistic.
Yeah, but that's
So, we are those people, like, people with ADHD, I believe I read, are like 5 times more likely to be entrepreneurs
oh,
because, yeah,
absolutely.
because we see gaps in where there are, like,
Yes.
that's why I do what I do. There was not somebody there for me to
Right,
do what I do.
right.
And I was like, well, I guess I'm going to have to fix that problem. And um and so, but at the same time, as you mentioned earlier, when you own a business, the structure that you don't have when you work for yourself can absolutely be the end of your business because you can't keep up with the things you do have to do on a daily basis. So being
You
able
know,
to surround yourself with people, find people who can help you, who, get it and can help keep you on track.
and that's the key. I
Mhm.
had I had staff members that helped keep me on track. And we've talked about this before too. I found out, actually, a colleague of mine told me years ago I had ADHD. He had just been diagnosed. And he said, "You need to get diagnosed." I said, "I don't have it." I fought like hell to say, "I don't have it." He goes, "I've known you for a while, and let me tell you, girl, you have," it was funny. How, and I never looked into it then. It must have taken me another 5 or 6 or 7 years because I didn't want to hear about it. But the one thing he told me about was this thing you call body doubling.
Yes.
I had to admit that when there was another person here, and she used to sit right here, which is what I'm pointing to right here. When there was another person here, it was easier to keep me on track. And especially the person that I had last, she would she would see me going off on a tangent and she'd go, come on back. We're doing this now. And it was very helpful. It was really, COVID changed so many things. COVID
Yes.
changed with people not being able to come into your house or I live in a condo. And
Hmm.
I remember getting like completely unraveled when they sent around a message that said only family members can come in. And I don't have any family members here. I went into a state of panic. So I called the front gate. This delightful woman, Janice, was here before she retired. And everybody loved her. She loved everybody. It was fabulous. I called the front gate because obviously a gated community. And I said, "Are you willing to break the law for me?" And she said, "How badly do I have to break the law for you?" I said, "Well, those names on my list, we're going to make this one my sister, this one my sister in law, this one my brother." We took the names that were on my list and made them all relations
You
because
got to do what you got to do.
I thought it was clever. Because
Yes.
the mere thought of not having anybody to, if I needed somebody, not, it was really draconian, that whole experience. And
Yeah.
that being able to walk on the beach is a big deal. Couldn't walk on the beach. Could not walk on the beach. So I was I was breaking the law and going in between people's houses. And one night I snuck onto the public beach. Uh, I went in through somebody's backyard or something, and I was coming out through where the public beach was because it was easier. And there was a policeman standing there.
Oh,
And it was two other people that followed me out, and he threatened to arrest us. I said, "You're not going to, I'm an old lady. You're not going to arrest me." He goes, "Watch me." And I'm like, "Oh, fuck. I'm about to get, oh, excuse me. We're on. I think we're just talking here. We are online. We are on display, whatever. This is why it's not a podcast. It's just a little conversation that we're having. But it was very scary, and here's this man telling me he's going to arrest me because that was one of the things that soothed me. I was
hmm.
didn't get to see many friends, but I could find how to get in through somebody's backyard and go to the beach because I seem to have a tremendous need for grounding,
Yes.
really to feel grounded, to be able to sort of gather myself at the end of the day. And that's the way I do it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just,
I mean, and I know for you that is really important because you talk
oh,
about it a lot. And
yeah,
I love going for walks, and I walk my dog every day and all that, but I didn't have a dog when COVID first started. And we were being really careful because my husband is high risk, and so he was
oh,
like, make sure you're keeping a huge distance from people and all that. It was a very scary time because we just didn't know what we were dealing with.
right.
And so and then when, like, what you were saying too, like, this kind of goes back to that emotional dysregulation. It's like people with ADHD are very often told they're too much, they're too sensitive, they're too this, they're too that. And
Yep.
we, are, we have something called RSD, which is rejection sensitive dysphoria.
What does
So,
what does that mean?
if somebody, even if it's a perceived slight, feels that it can send them reeling. So, for example, maybe you and I were supposed to go to dinner one night, and at the last minute, you text me and say, "I'm really sorry, something came up. We'll get together soon." My first thought might be, "Oh, I hope everything's okay." But
Right.
then my brain might start to spiral. "Oh, I knew it. She doesn't like me. She didn't really want to do this dinner anyway." And by the
Oh,
time you're done, you are convinced that everybody hates you. And it is, yeah, it can be really, really debilitating. And so now that I know what that is, when I am feeling like that, I'm like, okay, wait, is this real? Or is this the RSD? And and so I will go and I'll take a walk and do things to really just kind of try to calm my central nervous system.
Oh,
Get because I people with ADHD in general do better in nature. um
yeah.
and so yeah, I like to work outside, when like I'll bring my computer out and sit outside and work, in the summer and things like that. And I like to take walks even when it's cold, just to get myself out there. And
Yeah.
that does help. But I was really surprised that the medication helped my emotional dysregulation as much as it did, because I don't think I realized initially how bad it was.
Wow.
um, and I say a lot, I wish I had been diagnosed sooner, not even so much for myself, but for my kids, because when they were young, I was
Oh,
very emotionally dysregulated and I was yelling
oh,
at them all the
oh,
time. And
oh,
not all the time, but a lot, and more than I should have.
yeah,
And
yeah.
and I've had conversations with them since then that kind of was like, okay, so I now understand why I do that, and I'm working to be better about it. And that did seem to really kind of help them too.
Oh, wow.
Um, but it also helps them to see, because both my kids have it as well. And all three of ours looks completely different than the others. Like nobody's looks the same. It's very interesting. Um, but I think it's important for them to see me being open about it, and
Right.
talking about what I still struggle with, and to see me actively working on it, so that they understand that they have a responsibility to work on theirs too.
Of
Because
course. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
ADHD is an explanation, it's not an excuse. And so when people are first diagnosed, I hear people say a lot, I feel like my ADHD is getting worse. And I'm like, it's actually not getting worse. It's just now you're sort of unconsciously unmasking, because there's like the sense of relief, like, okay, this is a real thing now. Like
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
you know. But also I hear people say, well, people are like, quit blaming everything on your ADHD. And I said, well, are you blaming it or are you naming it? And they
Oh,
go, well, what's the difference? I
yeah.
said, if it's you going, oh, I think this is ADHD, right? That's one thing. If it's you saying, well, it's my ADHD, deal with it. That's blaming. That's you
Interesting.
um that's you using it as an excuse. But when you are just going, this is ADHD and this is what I need help with, because it's important to ask for help.
Uh-huh.
That's not you blaming your ADHD. You are explaining to somebody, this is something I struggle with because of my ADHD, and this is something that might help me do better with it. You're still trying to take the action,
Wow.
but you just may need assistance with it in some level. So um I said, but you naming it is not the same as blaming everything on your ADHD, not even close. I
I'm naming it more now as I learn about it
Mhm.
or something because I didn't really know some of the stuff I did was caused by that.
Mhm.
And when I started again, when I started studying Dr. Amen's stuff, what I noticed before my own behavior is I noticed my mother.
Yeah.
And between the lost keys and the every piece of clothing that I own that came from her has the tag cut out in the back. She would, the moment she'd get a new piece of clothing, she would cut out and there's a lot of little holes back there too. She didn't cut them too close. Where she cut them too close, she couldn't stand to have anything touching the back of her neck. Now, I I understand that's one of the symptoms.
Yes, sensory issues is part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I began noticing, um,
Mm-mm.
she was a genius. She was a brilliant, brilliant woman, and she was an artist, and she was a craftsperson. But when she finished a project, she just walked away from it and didn't. It was as if it didn't exist. And it's,
Yes.
oh my goodness! And as she got older, of course, it she didn't even notice the orange juice on the counter or things like that. I didn't realize. I think it was I thought it was just about getting older. But when I began learning more about it, I'm going, well, how do you like that? She had it too.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up a really good point, which is that so often we don't have a sense of accomplishment when we finish something. We're more, I ask people all the time, do you feel a sense of accomplishment or do you feel relieved it's over? And they're like, relieved it's over. It's sort of like, okay. moving on. What's the next thing?
You know, I did not. I'm glad to hear you say that because when I wrote my first book, people said to me, "Aren't you excited? Isn't it wonderful?" I went, "What? It's done. That was
Yeah.
it. Done. It was that's all." And I would go out and people would ask about. I never carried it with me. I never, And then there was another one, and then there was another one. Same thing with all of them. I didn't quite get it,
Yeah.
and I had a boyfriend that used to say to me, "How come you never celebrate anything?" And the
Yep.
last page in the book, then the 54 Ways to Stay Positive book, is a whole piece on celebration because he was right about that. Now, he wanted to celebrate everything,
Yeah.
breakfast, lunch, dinner, everything. So he went to the other extreme of celebration to where it was nauseating after a while. But I began to see as time went on that I didn't. I didn't
Hmm.
celebrate those accomplishments. So now I have little books. I have, coaching. I have ways to reflect when I have accomplished something. And
Hmm.
in my circle, the programs where I use wisdom circles, we always do that at the end. We always
Yes.
we always have that. So it's become I'm wiring that in to
Hmm.
everything I do because it's really important. And I'm very good at keeping a gratitude journal at night. So there
That's
are things that I
awesome.
do to overcome that piece of it. But more often than not, I would skip over the celebration part.
Yep,
I
I mean, part of my coaching very often is I'll start off by saying, "Okay, tell me some wins."
that
Because I
you
want
are by saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, and because I want people to start thinking in terms of like I have this one client, she's like, "I knew you were going to ask me that." She goes, "I think about you all week." What am I going to tell her? And I'm like, "But it doesn't always have to be a big thing. It can be
Yeah.
simply like, this pile that I was walking past for, a month and a half, I finally like did something with it, and it wasn't, it doesn't have to always be a huge thing. It just something. And, when I'm teaching goal setting for people with ADHD, that's a big component. Like
Yeah.
celebrate the wins because that's something that helps to keep you motivated.
Absolutely.
It boosts your self esteem. And it helps you go, okay, I am accomplishing things, So I think I agree. I think it's a very important aspect of ADHD that people need to do more of because they don't celebrate.
Well, and I think in general, people need to do more of that. I mean,
Mhm.
I train mostly managers and leaders, and in general, they don't celebrate people's wins quite as much as they should.
Yeah.
And the I think part of what gets lost in translation is that there are many ways to celebrate wins. There are many ways to talk about those things. I think what people hear is, "How many times do you want me to praise them?" And they just, especially the higher the level of management, the more I get pushed back. uh,
Mhm.
not just it's about recognizing strengths and talking about strengths, but I think people generalize that into,
Yeah.
why do you need so much praise? But apparently some of us do. I think we all need the celebration of our strengths, the celebration of our accomplishments,
Yeah,
right?
I agree. And especially I think especially for people with ADHD because we have spent so much of our life feeling like we haven't done anything, feeling that we're not smart enough, feeling that we're not good enough, feeling like we're just lazy, stupid people, at least that was me. Um I think to then recognize, actually, I'm really smart. I have really, like I pick up on things that other people don't. Like I said, I'm an out of the box thinker and things like that. Like I actually do have a lot of gifts, and so I try to really celebrate those things. And when I talk to clients, and I'll say, okay, so what obstacles did you overcome with something that they've been struggling with? And then they kind of go, well, I did overcome that, didn't I? And I'm like, yeah, you did.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I just think it's so important for people to really understand that, yeah, you may have spent your life probably being told you have so much potential. Can't tell you how often I heard that one. Or that you were lazy or whatever. And then you eventually start telling that to yourself.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it takes time to get past that where you're not seeing yourself as that person anymore. And so that's one of the reasons when I'm working with clients that I'm, trying to be like, let's look at the good stuff too. What are some wins? What are the things that you did accomplish? So that they can really start to recognize the the gifts that they have that they still haven't found yet. I'm seeing it in them sometimes, but they're not seeing it yet. And so, yeah,
I think it might be hard. It's a little bit hard to see when you're in the middle of it. And I didn't notice a lot of this stuff again because I was very well supported. I made sure I was well supported. But since
yeah.
COVID, that has not been the case. So maybe that's why it's showing up more now, or maybe because I'm getting older. It could be that too.
I
I
mean, it could be a combination. It
yeah,
could be a combination, yeah, because when you have people who are helping to kind of fill in the gaps where
yeah,
you struggle, like you had an assistant that was like, come on, let's come back. We're getting sidetracked, whatever. When you suddenly don't have that anymore, you're
right.
going to be left to your own devices. You're going to be off doing something else. Right.
Yeah,
And,
I sometimes ask the question, I because I have noticed that many of the like a lot of the big names, the men that own businesses, they'll tell you they're or they may use the phrase ADD or ADHD. I don't even know which is the right phrase, and they'll tell you that. And one
Mhm.
of them, in fact, I'm going to interview in a couple of days. Quite the business owner, quite the creative guy, but he'll tell you in the middle of a comment, "Oh, don't worry about me, I'm ADD." So one of the first questions I had for him, as we were doing our pre-interview, I said, "You've started all these businesses and you've done all this. Have you always had an assistant?" Oh, I couldn't live without my assistant
Yeah.
because and I think that's the secret is that when you're able to germinate that idea and have that idea, it's like handing off the ball,
Yeah.
because we're starters, but not necessarily. That's people keep telling me you're not all these tests. They're not ADHD tests. They're just personality tests.
Yeah.
You're not. You're a good. What do they call it? I don't know, instigator. You're a good start. You're a good
You're
start.
initiator. Yeah.
You're a good initiator, but you have bad follow through.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
very,
That's,
very interesting. It's very
yeah. Because
interesting.
the dopamine runs out, or you get, you have shiny object syndrome, or,
Are they going to put? I'm waiting for it to be a little mouth spray. Really, I'm serious. I think I've got this little CBD thing that you just spray in your mouth.
yeah.
Uh, when are they gonna put dopamine in a bottle? Well, is it no? What do we do? So does sugar have the same effect, or does caffeine have the same effect? What is it? I'm not asking whether it's right or wrong, but what is it that we do when we need that, other than
Okay.
looking
That's
at
a
our
that's a really good question. So, um, when I was first going on medication, how it was explained to me was because I didn't think it would work because I was unknowingly self-medicating with caffeine, like just a ton of it. And it
yeah,
would help, but not quite the same way. And so I thought, well, I don't think this is going to work because I've been using caffeine and I still have all these problems, right? And so for people with ADHD, our reticular activating system, which is kind of like the motherboard of the brain, is understimulated. And actually, the hyperactivity, which is not always physical, for especially for women, it tends to be up here. We have
there.
so much going on up there, and it's just like chaos.
That's the
Uh,
hamster wheel thing when you just keep running on the same hamster wheel.
yeah, I used to say, because people will ask me what meds do for me, and I said, well, without meds, my brain is like dumpster fire anarchy. It's just like chaos, and I'm just running around trying to put out fires that I'm pretty sure I set. And then when I have my medication, it's more like a well-run three-ring circus. So there's still a lot going on up there, but
Okay.
I don't feel completely overwhelmed by it. And so, what the medication does is it stimulates the reticular activating system to what everyone else considers to be baseline or close to it anyway. So, it really is just sort of leveling the playing field in that department. Um, and so, I was like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And so, while medication is considered to be the most effective way to handle it, you can do, a lot of people will do like heavy cardio workouts. Cardio will help. It's got to be pretty intense, but it can help. It's not quite the same as medication, but for some people, it is a good solution. Um, but the things that get us to do the thing with or without medication are, if we're interested in it, we will go into hyper focus. ADHD is nothing if not contrarian, right? It's just like we don't have attention, we have hyperfocus. But it's not that we don't have attention. It's actually our brain wants to pay attention to everything and we can't regulate it. That's the problem. But so if we're interested in it, if it is novel or exciting, if it is
Yeah.
challenging, urgent, or if there's a lot of pressure. So for people who, I mean, I don't know anyone with ADHD who was not the I do the term paper the night before person. You know, they would be like, now this is not a term paper. You can start the night before. I'm like, yeah, watch me. And this was before the internet. I'm dating myself. That was before the internet, right? So I had like Encyclopedia Britannica if I, needed to research something, whatever. But yeah, I every single time and every single time I go, I'm never doing this again. But again, my poor working memory helps me forget very quickly the pain of that all nighter. And so, of course, I did it every single time.
Oh,
Uh, yeah. So, but caffeine can help. There's a lot of people who do use caffeine. If they're like, oh, yeah, I like live off Mountain Dew, I wonder myself, "Oh, I wonder if they're ADHD." Of course, I don't know. Uh, but what you want to be aware of is so addiction rates for people with ADHD are very high. Um, Ironically, medication can help prevent addiction because what's happening is when your brain is low on dopamine, all it's looking for is dopamine. So it can find it in food, drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, phone, all of that. And so like if people get on their phones first thing in the morning, it sets this false dopamine level that your body's then trying to keep up with for the rest of the day.
wow.
So yeah, don't do that one. Um, but yeah, so dancing, like me, I'm always like dance party. Like if you're
Yeah.
low on dopamine, have a dance party. Listen to music. I thought this everybody did this. I can listen to the same song like over and over and over and over again. And apparently that's an ADHD thing. I thought everybody did that. Apparently not. Um, but I used to be a grazer with food. I would be walking around trying to get myself to do the thing, whatever it was, and I inevitably would go through the kitchen and I would just take a little and I and that doesn't happen now because I'm actually doing the things
Right.
and and I just don't have that. My brain's not looking for it anymore. So it is something that is uh uh so when people are worried about like what they can do in terms of working with their ADHD if they don't want to do medication. That's what I would just say. Just be careful. Don't try not to use food because that tends to be
I'm still a grazer. I'm still a grazer.
yeah. I
I
don't.
think, I think with me, I think that comes from when I was in my 20s and all I did was drink coffee and smoke cigarettes because I thought that
Mhm.
was the way to go and had a container of yogurt at noon. I collapsed. I collapsed in a bank. I collapsed in. I literally would just start falling down. So of course, then you have to take all the tests, and found out I had low blood sugar.
Mhm.
I was, I grazed because I was told that I needed to eat every 2 hours. And I was working in the corporate world at the time, and people would come over and go, "Oh, is it your feeding time again?" They'd look at there was always a bowl of nuts. There was always something there. And
Yeah.
that does create the habit, though,
Yeah.
of grazing. And then let's face it, the powers that be who taught us how to lose weight at one point told us to eat every 3 or 4 hours so our sugar didn't drop. Now, of course, they want us to fast, but it's
I feel like that's an ever changing
it is
landscape.
it is
I-
ever changing. It is ever changing, and I don't do caffeine, so I don't have that. Uh, I get overstimulated and have problems sleeping, so I can't do the caffeine anymore. But I have found herbal teas that are, I keep trying new ones
yeah.
that are really good. Right now, we have hibiscus. Uh, so at least there's something. There's a little. It's flavorful. It's a little something. It's very
Yeah.
interesting. The thing is very, very interesting. When it's not interesting, it's depressing because it's like, oh my God, look at the mess. And then gradually have to. I use a lot of self-talk. Uh,
Mhm.
a tip yesterday, listening to a speaker, uh, she said, become a decider. And I said, what the heck is that? She said, for a while, and it's for practice more than anything, say, I'm deciding to have a cup of tea now. I'm
Yeah.
deciding to move my files now. I'm deciding to brush my teeth now. To make more, and she wasn't talking about ADHD, she was talking about clarity. She was talking about how to gain more clarity in your life. And I liked that idea.
Yeah.
Except I tend to go on automatic pilot. So I can do all this stuff, but my head's over here doing something else, talking about, thinking about something else. So I like this idea of I am deciding to sit here and do this work right now. I think so. I'll let you know how that goes because I think it was very, very helpful.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that when we can make very conscious choices, like I have on my written calendar, I have the top 3 things I'm going to do that day,
Yeah.
which makes it, and I decide that the night before, so when I come in, I know exactly what I'm coming
Right.
to.
Right.
And the other aspect of this, and this brings up another thing too, is one of the things I try to teach people to do is how to take a break, because people with
Ah,
ADHD panic when I say, I'm going to teach you how to take breaks, because they're like, no, because if I take a break, then I'm not going to go back.
right.
I'm going to lose my momentum. And I'm like, well, I have a few rules, but that you have to do. But, so the one rule is you have to time the break. Like, don't just be like, oh, I'll be back in around 10 minutes. No, you need like a visual timer so you can see how much time is left, and 10
Mm.
minutes or whatever it is. I don't care. But like, that's what you need. Number one. Number two, don't sit down. If you sit down, especially in like a comfortable chair, you're
Oh,
you're done. Um, the exception for that is if you are going to sit down to eat something, but then you have to do it at the dining room where it's not like a comfortable
right. Right.
thing. And the other top thing I tell people is know exactly what you're coming back to do. If you're like, well, I'm going to come back and finish this later, but it's kind of this vague thing where you haven't really decided yet. Again,
Yeah.
your brain's going to be like, nope, we're going to do something else, and that's going to be the end of it. So it's something that, and I have had clients that are just like, okay, I have to admit, I really kind of thought you were full of it with this thing, but it has actually been really helpful. I do actually come back more than I don't. I'm like, that's all I'm asking. It's
Oh,
not going to necessarily work every time,
yeah.
but works way more. I'm sorry. Let my dog out of my office here. He's barking and he's going to be a huge.
Okay, that's fine. It's funny. I can't hear him barking, but so this is a most interesting conversation we're having. Yes,
Oh
and
yeah.
I'm just talking to whoever's out there. Uh, I'm just gonna. I have a question, and then I'll let you go because I've been asked you to stay for a long time. Um, where does mindfulness fit in here?
So mindfulness, a lot of people with ADHD kind of have given up on mindfulness, and I encourage them not to. They think they can't because their brain's like all over the place, right? But I actually learned transcendental meditation in my
Oh,
early
yeah.
40s. I lost both my parents within 6 months of each other.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then my son was hospitalized. There was just a ton of stuff that had happened. And I was just like, I can't cope. And this was before I was diagnosed. And I had been seeing a lot of stuff about transcendental meditation. So I was like, all right, I had gotten part of my inheritance after my mom passed. And I thought, it was one of those things, the universe provides. It was like exactly what I needed to pay for it. And I'm
Right.
like, okay, I'm doing this. And when I went in, I said, I just can't make my brain stop. I can't. And she said, the mind is designed to be active. So it's okay. And I was like, really? Like it was the first time I felt like I had been given permission to like have thoughts. And so while I may not do it the way that, they intended, it was still something where I could sit down and I would just sit there for 20 minutes, and I have a timer. Again, because I can't feel time passing very well. And it is incredibly helpful for me. And I go through phases where I do it all the time. Like I'll do it twice a day, which you're supposed to do. Sometimes I won't do it at all for a while. And then I usually always end up going back because I do notice a difference in
Yeah.
how I
Yeah.
feel.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
it helps to lower blood pressure. It helps to kind of re-central your central nervous system. So I do encourage people who have ADHD, don't give up on mindfulness. Um, because we really do need it in day-to-day life. Like mindfulness isn't just like Om Zen stuff. It's also, what do I have to work on today? And
Oh,
being,
it's
and
being
to, yeah, and to be thoughtful about what it is that you are working on, or who it is you're talking to, or, whatever it is, like anytime you can get yourself in a place of, I need to be present with ADHD, as you and I both know, that is very tricky. Like
Yeah.
you can have all the intention of the world to be able to listen to a conversation, but sometimes the mind just wanders. And not because of something that they said, but they sighed a certain way that reminded you of something that happened in the third grade. And then your brain's off on a tangent. And then, God knows what finally brings you back into the conversation. And then, I can't tell you how many times I've had the thought, oh, how long have I been gone? Because I have no idea what they're talking about at that point. And it's like I've definitely gotten better with it, but that was one of the things that I have always hated about my ADHD, because I don't like how it makes people feel, because they know when you haven't been listening and it hurts feelings, and I'm like, I don't want that.
That's
You're important to me and I don't like that.
I
That
felt
I make you feel that way.
myself. I really had to train myself to listen carefully. And I can't say my mind never wanders, but I've gotten better at that. And I think I have well, I used to have a twice a day meditation practice, very similar. I did take TM back a long time ago. Uh, and then now I do a meditation called Ziva, which is basically TM. It's very much like TM. Uh, but I'm finding that I'm not getting that second one in during the day, and I feel the difference. It just
Mhm.
at this is like 2:30 is a good time for me to meditate. 3:30 is a good time for me to meditate. But if I get caught up in something, then it goes. And I have been noticing the difference by cutting out that meditation. But now I'm really trying to just give myself enough permission to say it's
Mhm.
okay, do 5 minutes, but
Yeah.
sit in the place that you sit to meditate and do it there. Don't close your eyes here. Don't go lay down on the bed. Just sit there. And I do find it helps calm my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is a really helpful way of kind of clearing what's going on in there. That, and I also do morning pages, which I think you and I have also talked about. I do that in the morning, and that's a really great way for me to just, because that's first thing, and I'm just getting a lot of stuff out of my head
Yeah.
at that point, which then makes the rest of the day feel less heavy for whatever reason.
And I found that by charting it, I have I call them positivity practices and happiness habits. And of course, I have a little chart with, you check off the things, even if I don't do them all. The fact that the consciousness that it is sitting there on my table. And by the way, if anybody wants that, I have it in a PDF. I can send it to you. So just email. Uh, but I have it on my table, and I find I keep them, and I see that some months I'm great. All the boxes are checked off, and some months I'm not as great.
Yeah.
And there was 4 or 5 days where it's like, where have you been? But I like keeping track of it because it reminds me. And I
Hmm.
to learn for myself that if I do, I guess this is a deal I made with myself, is that if I do two things, it's a successful day.
Yep.
If I make my bed,
Hmm.
tempted are we sometimes to jump the hell out of that bed, but make my bed and make sure that the sink is dry and empty at night. I
Mm.
like the bookends on the day,
Yeah.
because in my lifetime there were many nights, who cared if there were dishes in the sink? I'll wash them in the morning. But then your day gets off to a different kind of start.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I,
Agreed.
I think my life is like a laboratory, and I try these things and I pass them along when they work. I study
Hmm.
all this stuff, but it really is like it can be like a three-ring circus in here sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just, the thing that I really want to like convey to people who have ADHD is, like, really give yourself some grace first of all,
Oh,
and
you need
all
grace.
and always look at things through the lens of curiosity.
Yeah.
You and I have had many conversations about this, and
Yes.
it's that versus judgment, because so often we are our own worst bullies, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Oh, you're so stupid. Why did you do that again? Da, 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 da. And
Oh,
so if you can go from that to, hey, all right, so how did this happen? Like, let's take a look at what happened. How can I do this differently next time?
yeah.
So it's almost like a third party is evaluating it, the
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
It just helps to take the shame out of the situation.
Yeah.
And you, if you look at things through judgment, you're going to just get more judgment. But if you look at it through the lens of curiosity, you're going to start to get answers. And
Yeah.
that's what you're looking for. but you can't have the shame at the same time because the shame will shut down the answers. And that's why I like curiosity, because it really just sort of makes it like, oh, that was interesting. That was an interesting choice I just made. Why did I do that? But it's not something that you will be able to do every single time. And it's not like I've never like berated myself since my diagnosis, but I do that part a lot less and I do the curiosity a lot more. And so I have been able to do better systems. And for people who have ADHD people in their life, like, please know they cannot help it. They are not lazy. They are not stupid. They honestly can't help it. And the more they can learn about their brain and the more you can learn about their brain, the
Mhm.
better you can help support them and the better they can support themselves. It
That is
makes such a
wonderful.
difference.
That is wonderful advice. And thank you. And thank you for taking your time out. I know you have a really busy practice.
Well, thank you for asking me. I'm like, oh yeah,
No,
I could talk about this all day long. So,
I don't talk about it a lot because, I come from the generation where you don't talk about your personal stuff. You don't
mhm.
do that. My mother must be going, "What the hell are you doing down there?" We were, I'm wired that way. I'm wired that way. So as I am moving into this new climate that we're living in, where people are now beginning to talk about their depression, where people are beginning to talk about their ADHD or whatever it is they're dealing with, I'm gradually moving into that space. So I felt it kind of important to help get the word out there that this is something we have to learn to deal with, and there are lots of alternatives. I
Mhm.
made choices than you made, and that may make it harder or easier or just more congruent for me.
Yeah, everybody needs to do what works for them, and that's one of the things that I am constantly trying to tell my clients. I joke, we're out of the box thinkers about everything, but trying to create systems for ourselves that work, and then we keep trying to do it the neurotypical way. And I'm like, you've been doing that your whole life. How's that worked for you? It hasn't. That's why you got checked, because you have ADHD. And so, I'm like, you have to find the things that work for you, and don't worry about what other people think. And
Right.
I've had people go, "Why do you do that?" And I'll explain why. And they're like, "I actually really like that. I was thinking I should do that too." So you never know who you may inspire.
That's
But
exactly right.
to me, it's about authenticity and just being able to be yourself and not
Yeah.
worrying about it. Take the mask off and be your quirky, fun self. And
Yeah.
you know, yeah,
And in the meantime, I'll be practicing my curiosity because sometimes I must say I still, and again, that has to do with my pattern of growing up and how much judgment there was in the school system. And my mother was a judge. So
literal judgment.
literally she was practicing that her whole life. That was her goal, and she was very focused, and so eventually she went from being a lawyer to a judge. But that's a habit. There's a habit there. There's a
Yeah.
habit there, and I incorporated a lot of that, having the Catholic school experience and all that. So I have to be
Mhm.
real careful about that one. So for me, practicing curiosity, and all the training I've had in the happiness business helps that a lot, because
Yeah.
curiosity is a positive emotion.
Yes.
So that's a great way to practice a positive emotion. And we'll leave it at that for all the people that have taken the time to be with us this far. Joy, I just want to thank you so much for being willing to come and
Like,
talk about this. And I'm hoping it will help a lot of people. Pretty wonderful. Give us your website or some way people can find you, your newsletter,
yeah.
how can people find you?
So my website is joriehoulihan.com,
Okay.
JoRiehoulihan. My handle on Instagram is also Jorie Houlihan, no spaces. So that's another place they can find me. And Facebook, I believe it's Jorie Houlihan CLL. Um, but yeah, those are the places they can find me. And you can always, if you want to like get on a quick, 15-minute call, I do complimentary calls to see where you're at, see if it might be a good fit. As far as if you're looking for coaching, or maybe you're just wanting to see if maybe you should get assessed. Of course, I'm not a doctor, but if I can recognize some things in you, I may say, yeah, maybe you should check it out.
Good, good.
But I'm always open to talking to people about this, because I think it's so important, especially for girls and women, to get assessed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because in some ways, it plays into old stereotypes.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we could do an episode just on that.
Oh, I know. And I'm not going to mention your hair color, but there are a lot of old stereotypes out there.
Yeah,
And
yeah, and it's just
when
like,
you,
"Oh, she's so emotional, she's so whatever, she's so,
yes,
ditzy," and yeah, so much.
all
So,
lived with some form of that stereotypical labeling. And I
yes.
think it's now, especially, it's time to make sure that we don't do that, that we actually know why we're doing things and be able to talk about it and
Yeah,
simply be able to talk about it. We're
being
just
able to talk.
challenged differently.
Yeah, I mean, we have a different operating system, is
Yeah,
what I tell people. Our Everybody else is a PC and we're a Mac. That's how it works.
that's
And
great.
it still accomplishes the same things. We just do it differently.
Yeah,
So,
wonderful.
and the more we can talk about it, the less shame there is involved with it, and it can get people who need the help that they need.
And thank you, because shame is the lowest vibration emotion that there is. So if you really want to put yourself in a pit, start feeling ashamed of who you are. So that, and that's a hard thing to get away from. So
Yeah,
it's a matter of, I one of the slides I use is a spiral. You have to get yourself on that upward spiral to get out of that. Otherwise, you're down the rabbit hole for a long time, and that's really difficult emotionally for people.
yeah, yeah. It is. So I hope, and if you have tried to get assessed and have, especially for women, if you've tried to get assessed and been told it's anxiety and depression, and you don't necessarily buy that, because that's what a lot of women, they default to anxiety and depression first.
Yep,
Advocate for yourself. Go, insist,
absolutely, absolutely,
or make them tell you why they think that it's not ADHD. Like, don't just accept that answer. You have
very
to,
good advice.
yeah,
Very good advice. Well,
yeah.
thank you. It's been so much fun. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again for having me. I've had a great time.
I'll probably see you next week or the week after. I don't remember. I'm time blindness. What can I tell you? I know it's on my calendar in two places.
Yay!
Okay. I
All
shall
right.
talk to you soon. Take care.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.